Today's guest, Geraldine Sutton-Stith, the Hopkinsville Kelly Little Green Men. Geraldine, the floor is yours. I had a bio, but now I can't find it, so I apologize for that. But let me stop sharing, and I'll let you have at it.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me. You have to excuse my little thing back here in the back. I've been thrown in the attic. My sewing room and my office is up in here right now, and so it's kind of a mess, but we're getting there. So just excuse a little background mess. But usually I ask when I speak, how many of you have heard of this story before today? Of course, I can't see anybody, so I don't know any hands are up. But anyway, um, it's a great story. And how I found out about it. Oh, hey, everybody. How I found out about it is by chance, actually. My parents kept this story hidden from us. They did not talk about it. Nobody talked about it. And the way I found out about it was back in 1969. Now, remember, this happened in 1955, so this was several years later. And back in 1969, I was 8 years old. This man and woman came to our farm and knocked on the door, and I answered the door. I was the oldest one in the room at the time, so I ran to the door and answered it. And this man and woman were standing there, and they asked to talk to my dad. Well, my mom and dad were in the back bedroom with my little brother, who was just a few months old at the time. So I ran back there and I told my dad, "There's somebody here wanting to talk to you." And so we all went to the front door, and they introduced themselves, and um, the man told my dad, said, "We want to talk to you about the green men." Well, here I was 8 years old, but I was already into like the sci-fi and the horror stuff. I loved it. I would read everything I could. I know it sounds crazy at 8 years old, but I did. And, watch everything on TV I could find. And so when he said green men, it really sparked an interest. And so my parents sat us down on the floor and they all sat down, and my dad started telling this incredible story. Um, it happened, of course, August 21st, 1955, in the little community of Kelly, Kentucky. Kelly is mostly, and still today, farmland, sparse little farms all over. Back then, there might have been 150 in the population. Today, I think it's just over 600. So it's still a small community. And it just so happened that my grandmother, Miss Glennie Langford, owned a little farm, and she was a widow at the time. So she had three small children who were 12, 10, and 7. And staying with her was my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen to help her with the farm, because they had a few farm animals and they had a small tobacco crop that they would tend. And so my Uncle JC was actually in the Korean War, so he hadn't been home very long. And so anyway, those are the people that lived in the house. Well, along comes my dad, his wife at the time, Vera, their friends, Billy Ray and June Taylor. They were stationed in Evansville. Now, they worked for a carnival. They were close to home. So they thought, well, my dad wanted to come in, see his mom, see his other brothers who lived in Hopkinsville down the road, and everything. Get some good home cooking for one. Carnival food, I'm sure, got pretty rough after a while. And so they headed down and spent the weekend there. They got there on like a Friday evening. And then we go to Sunday evening, the 21st. Well, they're sitting in there. This is their last evening being there. And so they're enjoying it. And Billy Ray decides to go out to the well to get some water. They didn't have plumbing. So he heads out to the well, which is in the front yard. And as he's standing there, he hears something and he looks to where he's hearing this sound. And lo and behold, there's this oval shaped object, silver, with the colors of the rainbow flowing behind it. And the funny thing about it was almost like 40 feet in the air from him. So it wasn't very far. So he could see this thing. It scared him. He didn't know what it was. So he runs in the house, slams the door behind him. Everybody stops and looks at him. And he tells them, he says, there is something out here. I just saw it. And he tries to explain what it was. Well, my grandmother tells him, says, listen, maybe it was just a shooting star. And he told her, he says, Miss Glennie, I know what those look like. It wasn't a shooting star. And she says, well, we've been having meteor showers all month. Maybe that's what it was. No, it wasn't that either. I know what those look like. And so he kept on, and everybody could see, especially his wife could see something was wrong. He was upset. Finally, my dad told him, says, listen, Billy, let's go out to the well. You tell me again what you saw and where it was at. So they head out to the well. They're standing there. He points to the sky where he saw it. Of course, it's not there now. And he tells him, he says, I saw it. It went across the sky and it went down in the back field. He saw it land back there. And my dad's looking and he's like, well, there's nothing here right now. I don't see anything. And as they're standing there, the old hound dog comes running across the yard, flies by them, tail tucked, ears down, runs under the house. Well, my dad doesn't think anything about it. He just thinks, well, he done got out in a beehive or something done got after him. So he wasn't too worried about it. So he tells Billy Ray, let's go finish up the evening. And because this is our last one here and we got to go back to work. So they head back into the house. And as they're heading back to the house, lo and behold, out from behind the house where he saw it land comes a little being. This thing is about 3.5 foot tall, has big glowing eyes, huge ears, a big round head. Its little arms are almost down to the ground, and it's floating over the ground. Well, of course, they didn't know what it was. So they both go running in the house, slamming the door behind them. And my dad tells everybody, there is something out here. I just saw it. And they're just all laughing at him because they thought, well, Billy Ray done got Lucky, which that's my daddy's nickname, Lucky, out there to go along with his little scheme here to try to scare the girls because Billy Ray's wife wasn't but 18. All the others were in their 20s, early 20s, some of them. And so that was their first thought. And they just kept on laughing at him and told him quit being silly. We don't believe anything's out there. And they kept on and they kept on. And my grandmother finally got aggravated with them and told them, says, listen, y'all need to stop. I got to get these 3 kids to bed and you two aren't helping any. And, what was she to do? So she just went and got the kids together, took them back to the bedroom, started putting them in bed. And when she come back up front, lo and behold, my dad was standing at the front door with a shotgun in his hand. In the back, Billy Ray was standing with a rifle at the back door. And she's thinking, well, okay, maybe something is wrong here. So she decides to go to the back door where Billy Ray is and just question him about it. So she goes out there on the door, sits down on a little stoop, And she asks him, Billy Ray, what did you see? And he told her, said, Miss Glennie, I don't know what it was, but I hope it's something that you never have to see. So they're sitting there and it's quiet and they can hear everybody in the house, the girls, talking amongst themselves. And all of a sudden, from around the corner of the house where my grandmother was sitting, here it is, a little being, about 3.5 feet tall with the big head, glowing eyes, big ears, arms down to the ground, just comes right around the corner. Well, she screams. Everybody comes running. And she tells them there is something out here. They were telling the truth. About that time, a shot rings out in the front of the house. They all run to the front, and there's Uncle JC shooting one through the window. Well, Billy Ray, he decides to run out the front door, and he runs out the front door, and he's standing there looking to see if they hit this thing, if it's laying there in the yard. He can't see anything, but as he's standing there, this hand comes down and tries to grab his hair. My Aunt Eileen grabs him and yanks him back in the house and tells him, says, there's something up there. A hand just tried to grab you. Well, my dad runs out there, turns toward where the hand came from, and lo and behold, there it sits, as big as you please. So he shoots it. He hits it, of course. It rolls. It floats away. And somebody shouts, well, there's one in the big tree, because they had these huge maple trees in the front yard. Well, he turned around. Sure enough, it was sitting on the limb. He shoots it. He hits it, of course. These are country boys. They know what they're doing. It floats to the ground, rolls away, and scurries off into the woods. Well, by the time it's all said and done, they're shooting them from everywhere. They're trying to keep them out of the house because they're coming up to the windows and doors. They did notice that if they would turn a light on, that they would kindly back off. So they tried to turn all the lights on in the house if they could, and that helped. And they would just go to the windows that, like the side windows and stuff where the lights weren't shining on them, like the porch lights and stuff. But they were still getting close enough to peer in. But what were they to do? They didn't know what these things were. They weren't killing them. They were jumping up and running off. And my dad was sure that the same ones they were killing were the same ones that were coming back. I know in several things that you can read, they've said there was 11 or 12 of them, but my dad always said that no, he believed it was 3 or 4. It was never that many, but they just kept coming back. And so you've got hysteria going on because the kids are crying. The women are crying. June, Billy Ray's wife, is about to absolutely lose it. And what are they to do? And Vera asks my dad, Lucky, what are we going to do? And he tells her, says, listen, we're going to go to Hopkinsville. We're going to get help. We're going to find help. He said, just calm down. We'll do this. And so he gets them all sitting down and calms them down, and it's quiet. When all of a sudden they heard one going across the tin roof. They could hear its little, like the talons on its fingers were clicking across the roof. Well, this really got the kids stirred up again. They started crying again. June was really about to lose it. Nobody knew what to do. They weren't killing these things. And, Vera asks my dad again, what are we going to do? He says, we're going to go to Hopkinsville. Just hold on. So they sat there a while longer, and it does get quiet again. He says, let's go. So they risk it, run out the door, hit the trucks, and head to Hopkinsville, looking behind them the whole way because they're terrified these things are going to follow them. Billy Ray knew that he seen a ship laying in that back field, and he thought, what if they got in the ship and followed them that way? So they just hightailed it to Hopkinsville, which was about 7 miles from where they lived. And here they are running in the police station in the middle of the night. You've got 11 people from the age of 7 to 50 running there in the middle of the night. One little officer on duty. So he's just, like amazed if there's that many people. So he's, what's wrong? And they all just start telling him, what just happened. He's not understanding. He's like, you're shooting men at your house. And my dad is like, you're not understanding what we're trying to tell you. And he was concerned, of course, like he should be, because they were talking about shooting stuff. And here you have three small kids. So what's going on here? So he tells them, says, listen, I'm going to call the chief. We'll figure this out. So he gets on the phone, calls Chief Russell Greenwell. The chief tells him, says, listen, try to calm them down as much as you can. Call Fort Campbell Army Base, which was just down the road from Hopkinsville. See what you can do there. Call the newspaper, call, everybody you can, every state trooper you can get. Let's get them out there. So that's what he did. By the time it was all said and done, you had a caravan of cars from everybody. You had state troopers, you had military, you had, of course, Chief Greenwell and his wife went. You had the photographer from the local newspaper and his wife, and just several people, going out there in the middle of the night to little bitty Kelly. They get there. It's pitch black dark, of course. They don't have security lights like we do now. They pull up, they get out, and they notice it feels funny. It doesn't feel right. There's an eerie feeling in the air. Of course, there was evidence something happened. You had shotgun and rifle shells all over the ground outside. You had shotgun and rifle shells inside the house. The house on the inside had been shot up around the woodwork. The screens had been shot through. What happened here? One of the cars that had some of the police officers in it did notice a glowing substance on the back fence where they had shot one. So the first thing they did is run out there to see what it was. Well, when they would go up to it, the glow would be gone. The only time you can see the glow is if you walked away from it. And they called for Chief Russell, Chief Greenwell to come up there and see what he thought. And he walked up there and looked at it, did the same thing to him, but he did notice that the grass was different where the glow was than where it wasn't. But they couldn't figure out what that was. So anyway, they searched the house for I think it was 2 or 3 hours. They searched the buildings, they searched even the animal pens, everywhere they could, they searched. The only thing they didn't do is they did not go out to the woods where that thing landed. But anyway, Greenwell told my grandmother, said, Miss Glennie, I am so sorry, but there's nothing here. Yes, something's happened here. That's clear. But there's no bodies. There's no blood. There's no body parts. There's nothing here to show that you did shoot anything. And so there's nothing we can do. So they all hightailed it out and left the family. Of course, a lot of them were disappointed, especially the photographer and his wife, because they wanted a picture. But no luck. So they left. The family was left there to finish up the rest of the night. And it was around 2:30 in the morning when everything got calmed down again. My grandmother got the kids back in bed, got them asleep. She headed toward her bed, got in bed. My dad sat there beside her in the rocking chair, shotgun across his lap. And she laid there, and she'd been awake a long time already, and they were stressed. They had been mentally and physically exhausted by now. And so she lay there and closed her eyes. Well, she opened them up, and lo and behold, there was one of those little things at the window again. And she thought, well, she's just tired. That's all it is. I'm tired. She opened her eyes up the second time. It was still standing there. When she opened up the third time, she told my dad they're back. And the battle began again. And they kept on shooting them until the sun came up and they finally left. The only reason they thought they left is because of the sunlight in their eyes. The sunlight hurt them. That's the only thing they could figure. My dad set the family down and he told them, he says, listen, he said, I heard all these people out here last night. They were making fun of us. No good can come of this. So we're going to forget this ever happened. You're not going to say a word about it. We're going to let it go. So the family agreed with him, which was going to be hard because they had just went through a lot. And the men had some of the men had made plans to run to Evansville before my dad and Billy Ray and the girls had to leave. So some of them left. Billy Ray, he had plans to go with one of the neighbors that lived behind my grandmother's farm. They were going to go hunting. Well, you got to realize that people were hearing and seeing things all night that night. Some of the neighbors even said that it sounded like there was a battle going on, like it was a war. And the friend that was going out with Billy Ray to go hunting, he told him, he says, listen, he says, I was going to come help y'all because I seen lights in the woods. And he says, I thought y'all were out there in the woods looking for some of your farm animals that had gotten out. He said, so I went back in the house, got my boots on, grabbed my flashlight, and I was headed your way when all of a sudden I heard gunfire. And he said, I wasn't coming after that because I wasn't going to take the risk of getting shot. And so Billy Ray told him what had happened. And he thought, well, that explains a lot. And so, anyway, the men were gone, the women were there by themselves. And then the people invasion started. People were coming from everywhere. They were camping out in the yard, setting up tents. They were setting up concession stands to sell stuff. Um, People were going up to the family and even the kids and demanding photographs and wanting interviews and was wanting to find out more. And it was really terrifying because they had people actually walking through the house and taking souvenirs from the house, walking around the yard, picking up everything they could and taking it. My grandmother, of course, like I said, the men had gone. So when they had gotten back, my dad was so furious because he couldn't even park in the driveway. He had to park down the road and walk up to the house. And he was furious. When he walked in the house and my grandmother met him, she told him, said, Elmer, that's my dad's name, Elmer, I don't know what we're going to do. They're taking everything we got. And my dad grabbed his shotgun and he says, well, I know what I'm going to do. And my grandmother stopped him and told him, says, you can't go out there and start shooting people. And he said, we're going to be doing something. And so she told him, says, well, listen, there's a police officer out here. I'll see if I can get some help. So she went out there and talked to the police officer. And he sympathized with her because it was bad. And he told her, he says, listen, I'll get some help out here and we'll see what we can do. So he called for some help and they were able to get the people gone. But as soon as they would leave and there was no police officers there, the people would come back. And this went on for days. It was estimated that around 2,000 people were there in 2 days, roaming that land and just doing everything. And my grandmother didn't know what to do. She was horrified. And, they were scared that these things, they didn't know what they were. They didn't know whether they'd be back or not. She didn't know what to do. So she finally decided that it just wasn't worth it anymore. So she sold the farm within 2 weeks and moved to Hopkinsville to an apartment complex. So did JC and Eileen. And they sold the farm to another family member that had kids. And if you talk to those kids today, they were horrified too. They did not want to live in that house because people in Kelly understood what happened because they were there. They were hearing the gunfire. They were hearing the commotion and the shouts and screams and the cussing that was going on. And, they knew something happened. Plus, what a lot of people don't realize is that people were seeing things all evening. There were state troopers that actually seen lights that they knew were not uh, a meteor shower because that's what a lot of people were thinking, meteor showers. But when you see it and then it's got a weird noise, meteors don't sound like what they were talking about. And then you had some soldiers at Fort Campbell that were seeing things that night. So you had all these different people, and you had neighbors that were seeing things that night. The following morning, one of the neighbors saw something take off out of the woods back there and just go. What was it? We don't know. But you got to think, proper protocol was never taken. They never took any samples, and by the time they got anybody there, it was too late because you had people trampling all over the place. They never roped anything off. Um, the next morning, they did have aircraft flying over, searching the area. There was people, soldiers out on the ground, searching the grounds. So you had all this going on, but they wanted to get rid of it. They didn't want it to be. The powers that be said, let's get rid of it. And they did, by golly. And basically, that's the story, guys. That's, you know, happened in 1955. It was horrifying for the family. I mean, it was rough. My dad would hardly ever talk about this. If you did get him to talk about it, you were lucky. And, I told you about that man and woman that came in 1969 to talk to my dad. Well, the following weekend, he took us out to Kelly to show us where this all happened. And the well is still there. It's still there today. The old house was still standing. Then he took us way back in the back of the field, and lo and behold, I'll never forget it. There was this huge spot on the ground that nothing was growing in. It was a perfect circle of grass that nothing was growing in. And I've had people tell me that lived, back then, kids that are grown now, they would walk through there and they seen the circle. There's many of them that walked through that circle going back there hunting and stuff. And so there are other people that knew the circle was back there. But like I said, they just wanted to get rid of the whole thing, and that's what they did.
Wow. Thank you, Geraldine. Awesome. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How big was that circle, by the way?
Well, you got to think, I was 8 years old. And if I had to compare it with anything, trying to remember with my 8-year-old mind, I would say it was as big as a 32 or 34-foot swimming pool. That big around.
Wow, big. Interesting, because there's actually a circle north of Duluth that I did an investigation on a few years ago. That's about 16-foot circle. Nothing grows there still, and this happened in the early 70s. So interesting. Well, anybody have any questions? I know there's got to be a million of them. Yeah, still trying to wrap your head around all that? Yeah, no kidding. What about everybody in Fargo? How are you guys doing?
Well, I have a question. I was wondering, now I read reports, and I think you might have said that, Geraldine, that the creatures had glowing eyes.
Yes.
What were they? I just went on like Wikipedia, just reading quick description. So they were like sort of a yellow center or iris, and then sort of a white outline around the outer part. Is that right?
I was always told they just had big glowing eyes.
Glowing eyes.
So by going by that, I would think just glowing yellow eyes.
Sure. Okay. So kind of yellow is what you guys heard.
Yes.
I just think that's interesting. I mean, there's no animals, at least terrestrial animals, not living in the ocean or lakes that have glowing eyes. And it almost sounds like that's more like possibly like a spacesuit or something. Because I know I've also read that your family members were shooting at these things, and there's like a metallic ping.
Yes.
So it almost sounds like it's not like organic. I mean, either some kind of robot or something like that, or a drone like thing, but with maybe something living inside of it. I just thought that was interesting, because there's no evolutionary reason for animals to have glowing eyes. I mean, if it's a predator,
Right.
you're going to scare away your prey, and if you're a prey, you're going to attract predators. So just my observation, I thought that was interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, they described it when they would hit them. They described it as hitting a tin bucket. That's what it sounded like to them. And like I said, these were country boys. They could shoot practically by the time they could walk.
Yeah, good
So,
shot. Yeah.
they were hitting these things, there's no doubt, but they just weren't killing them. They were just invincible, apparently. They had something going on there because, you got a 22 rifle, you got a 20 and a 12 gauge shotguns, two of them. A shotgun, it blasts you pretty good.
Packs
And
a punch, sure. Yeah. So it sounds
so,
like the kinetic energy, it would hit them and knock them back, but it wouldn't do any damage.
well, also I forgot to mention this part too. They did notice a luminescent glow around them, and when they would hit them, that glow would go away. Did they have some kind of force field around them? We don't know.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anybody? Sure. Okay, here we go. This was in Kelly, Kentucky, back in 1955. August 21st, 1955, if I remember right.
Yes.
Hi,
Yeah.
Geraldine. I was wondering if you think the well has any significance to the story other than being a place where it was first seen.
I've never had that asked before if the well had anything. I don't know. I've had people tell me that maybe it was the kids because, things were seen during the day that day also that is never talked about. And them being small, the kids, being small, they thought maybe they had come, for the kids or to play with the kids or something. That somebody, several people have come up with that theory. I don't know about that theory because my mom and her first husband actually lived over in the valley there in Kelly, and they had 7 kids. So, my thinking is if they were wanting kids, they would have went to that house instead of, uh, my grandmother's house. But, that's my thinking. But no, nobody's ever said anything about the well. There's a lot of different things, and researching this over centuries, there have been different little beings that are a lot like the Kelly Goblins. The Cherokee had a little being that they would have to fight with quite often because, the Cherokee would move to different hunting lands. And every time they would move to a different spot to hunt, it seems like there's this little being that looked a lot like the goblins that they would have to fight with to be able to hunt on that land. And there are other Native American tribes that have had the same thing happen. They've had some little being that would mess with them, would go and like push their canoes off in the water, and different things like that. And so, I don't know. I've had people come ask me, what about the caves? Is there caves in Kelly? Well, yeah. Kentucky is nothing but caves. There's cave systems in Kentucky that have not been touched, probably never will be touched. We're nothing but a big old cave. Our houses sit on caves here. And, could they have come from caves? Are they little beings? And there's stories that people have about little beings that look a lot like the goblins, the Kelly Green Men. So, another theory is, okay, if they were from outer space, did they leave some of them here, that night? Well, who knows? We don't know. But, there's all kinds of theories and there's all kinds of stories if you really, really dig that make you do a lot of wondering about little beings like this. Because these little beings, as well as I, y'all are MUFON people, as well as I, that the ones people see the most are the grays, the big tall ones with the big head, long, that type of alien. The ones that my family dealt with, they're different.
Very different.
Very different.
Awesome. So, all right. So you brought it up. You said that there were some stories there, something happened that next day during the day. So now we have to hear what you're talking about.
Well, people were just hearing and seeing things, and they didn't know what they were. And you got to realize, if you live close to a military base, you're going to put it off on the military base. You're going to think, well, they're the ones, they're doing something. And, that's what people want to think, because a lot of people don't want to believe that we have other things out here. We are it. We're at the top of the food chain, and there's nothing else like us. There's nothing else that's going to be like us. And there's no little beings out there. And so, we live close to a military base. We live right down the road from Fort Knox here in Kentucky. And see, Fort Campbell was only 10 miles away from Hopkinsville. So, when people were hearing and seeing things during the day and during the night, that night, they were thinking that it was the military. I mean, there's even stories where people had seen things like months before the Kelly incident that people don't know about. There was this one guy that was out in the field with one of his work hands, and they saw an object. Chief Russell Greenwell, back in 1952, he was part of a big thing where he had been down to Kentucky Lake to see his sister, and he was coming back home, and there was these cars all stopped in the road, and he's like, what's going on here? And he gets out, and everybody's looking up in the sky, and there's this big ship sitting up there in the sky, not moving. It's sat there for I forget how long, a long time. And when it finally just zipped off, and this is the Chief Russell Greenwell, a pillar of the community that's seen this. So he takes off back to where his sister was, and he asked them, because she worked at a sportsman's club, and asked everybody there, did you see this? Because it must have been pretty close. And several people there saw it. All these people in the road saw it. And he estimated that 75 to 100 people saw that object in the sky that day.
Wow. And go ahead.
One of the deputy sheriffs there that worked with Chief Greenwell, Frank Dedkus, he totally believed the family story, because him and another police officer had actually seen 3 objects that they couldn't explain. People were seeing these things back in the 50s. So, that's why a lot of people did believe the family. And then you have, of course, the whole bunch of them that don't believe it. And then you have the military, the government, that wants to get rid of it because they don't want nobody knowing about it. And so, it's a lot. It's a lot. Once you start really getting into it and reading and digging up stuff, there was a lot that was going on back in the 50s that people just don't realize.
Yeah, there was quite a bit going on back there, and you're right. Not too many people were talking about it back then, for sure. So, is there any more questions in Fargo? Because I can't see you guys, so I'm not sure.
We have a couple of questions that came in from online, or one question and a comment. One moment. Yep. Jamie said that Geraldine, they like your shirt. Your the goblin shirt is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta represent.
And Stephen from online says, well, he was a little late for the meeting, and he was wondering how many rounds were fired by the family that night.
Oh, I have no clue.
A lot.
Apparently quite a bit. And they were lucky they even had that much on them, I guess, because a lot of people, they go shooting or hunting or whatever, and then they really don't fill up their, replace everything until they get ready to go hunting again. Well, luckily they had enough to do them all night. I'm sure they were probably being very sparing with them, but but yeah, and another thing too that happened that is a really interesting thing is that when one time when JC and my dad were out back, they went out there to look around, I guess, to find, see if they could find any of them anywhere. And they heard something and looked, turned around where they heard the noise, and they seen one of them going up the side of the house, going toward the roof. Of course, they shot at it. And when they shot it, it actually floated from the house over to the edge of the woods. And I believe, if I remember right, it was like 40 to 50 feet that it floated across there. And they saw this thing do that. And like I said, my Uncle JC was a Korean War vet. And this thing that happened to them just, well, it messed them all up. But it especially messed him up because, I think he probably seen things over there in Korea that we didn't want, he never talked about. And these little things here, here they are shooting at them. They won't die. And somebody asked him one time, if he were to ever see them again or have an experience like that again, would he talk about it? And he says, no. If it ever happened again, he wouldn't speak of it at all. Because, one thing that's terrifying, another thing, people just made so much fun of them and beat them. Our family got beat down over this. People don't realize what they went through. And, but yeah, he said he would never, ever speak of it if he ever seen anything like this again.
I don't blame him. Don't blame him at all. Anybody else in Fargo?
Yeah, we do have another question. Just one moment.
Anybody here in at Rapids? Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess my question is, did they ever talk about, so with these beings there, did they ever come at them and threaten them that way? Or were they just more so like they could see them, they were just aware of them? So were they threatening in any way, or were they just so scared to see them?
No, and that's something else. That's a whole nother thing right there. Because they didn't act like they're trying to hurt them. If anything, my grandmother thought they needed help because they were coming at them with their hands in the air, like surrendering. Now, how did they know to do that? I don't know, but that's what they were doing. And they didn't have any kind of weapons or anything on them. And so at one time, my grandmother even told my dad, said, why don't we just leave them alone? Maybe something's wrong. Just don't shoot at them anymore and maybe they'll go away. Well, my dad didn't feel that was the right thing to do. His thing was shoot first, ask questions later. He was an old country boy. He wasn't going to let these things in the house. He had to protect his wife, his mama, his brothers, and his little sister. He wasn't going to let these things in, not knowing what they were. But yeah, see, that was something that was thought about. And another thing too, after the fact, were they goblins? Because my grandmother had been to church that evening. It was a Sunday evening this happened on. She was a churchgoer. She was very religious. And she thought maybe it was something the devil had brought forth. That something, she had done wrong. Maybe something one of the family members had done wrong, because maybe that's what these were. And that's where they got the goblin thing from. It was a little, I guess, afterwards that they decided they were extraterrestrial. But yeah, I mean, yeah, they just, it makes you kind of feel sorry for them because what if they did need help? We don't know.
I have one more question, if I may. You were talking about the rainbow lights around the craft itself. Do you know where or how that rainbow effect was on the craft?
It was the exhaust. It came out of the back. It was the exhaust.
Oh,
He said it came out of the back and it was the colors of the rainbow coming out of the back of it.
thank you. I'm gonna step
Thank
off.
you.
Awesome. Fargo, you got any more? We got one here. All right, taking too long. Here you go.
Oh, we have another question when you guys are done there.
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, I've seen your show, 3 or 4 different versions of it on different channels. And you know yourself that, what's her name?
Geraldine.
Geraldine. You
Mhm.
know, Geraldine, how the media and these shows kind of exploit a little more to
yeah.
make it more interesting. And one item they brought up, well, first I saw yours before all these other ones came in. And there, I'm trying to be nice about it.
Go
They
ahead,
said
spit her out.
okay, there was moonshine involved in that
Oh
party
yeah,
with your friends. You know what I'm
yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
And
I get
the
it now.
government and the Highway Patrol Police tried to blame it all on that.
Well, they can't because there wasn't nothing there. There was no moonshine still. There was nothing
Okay.
there. My grandmother was really religious. She did not allow that around her own kids, except,
All
the
right.
3 small ones. It's a wonder she even let them smoke around them, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. That just was the type of person she was. They knew better.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm sure JC would probably run to Hopkinsville to Big Brother's house and might drink a little there. I can see that happening. And I knew my dad and Billy Ray's with the carnival. I'm sure they had all kinds of stuff they could do at the
Yeah.
carnival.
Yeah.
But the fact remains, they knew better than to do any of that or bring any of that into my grandmother's home. She probably would have beat them.
That's good because I've like I told you, I've seen a couple 3 versions of it.
Oh yeah. See,
But
that's the easy way out.
I wanted to go. That's why I'm here today. 'Cause I know all about your situation. I've read about it and I've seen it, versions of it. And I wanted to talk to the person that actually was there that could tell the truth without being, it's like the Walton guy who was taken up in Oregon.
Yeah.
He come right on national TV and says the movie had added different things to it just to make it
Yes.
look better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what
He
they
was,
do. Yeah, of course they do that.
yeah,
Yeah, I've talked to Travis Walton. I've heard him speak, and that man's went through something. There is no doubt in my mind that
yeah,
man went through something.
yeah,
And yeah, when they do a movie, they want to beef it up, because they think that it won't get watched if it's slow or boring, and it won't.
yeah,
So they have to do stuff like that. So yeah,
yeah,
there's a lot of that Fire in the Sky movie that is not factual at all.
right. Okay, thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Fargo.
Yeah, we do have another question. Just one moment. She's just going to come up here and ask. Did you want to ask me or do you want to? Okay. Have a seat. You kind of lean into the laptop.
Hi, I really
Hi.
appreciate your story.
Well, thank you.
The question that I have is, now that you've come public and you're telling this story, how is the relationship between you and your family?
Oh, we're fine. I mean, of course, my dad died in 95. So he's not here to see it. But back before he passed, right before he passed, he had some people from Germany trying to get a hold of him, wanting to talk about the story. They were even wanting to bring him over to Germany. Now, why, I don't know. That was kind of weird. But he just told him, he says, no, I don't want to talk about it. It's the past. It's gone. And I think he was afraid because it's like I tell people, my dad was a small man, but he would fight a bear for what he believed in. And there were 2 things on this earth that terrified him. One was tornadoes because he was in one, and the other was the green men. He was terrified. I think the whole family was because they didn't know if they'd be back. And I think that was the major fear. We don't know why they were here in the first place and what they wanted. And, it was my grandmother's fear. My dad, Billy Ray, and the girls leaving to go back to work. She wasn't going to have anybody there with her except 3 small kids and my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen. And she didn't know if they would be able to handle it if they were to come back. And that was a fear, and that was a fear for everybody in Kelly. Like I said earlier, my mom lived there with her 7 kids, and and they were all terrified that these things were going to come back. And, my mama had a great story of one night when she was left there. Her husband had left. She called it honky tonkin. He left to go honky tonkin, and left her there with the 7 kids. And they heard something walking across the front porch. Well, you know what? She didn't know what it was. She had 7 kids to protect. She picked up the shotgun they had, pointed it, and shot at the door. It was the milk cow. Luckily, she didn't hit her. But yeah, it was terrifying for the people that lived in Kelly. They were all afraid. Like I said, the night this happened, the neighbors said it sounded like a war going on. It sounded like a battlefield. And everybody was afraid to come out and do anything because they're afraid they'd get shot. I don't blame them. I'd be afraid too.
This
You
is
know, and
true.
nobody knew what happened until the next day when word got out.
So has any of your other family members become gone public with this story, or is it just
Oh, no, nobody. I think they're afraid because you got to have a thick skin to take a story on. I'm going to be honest with you. It's just like my younger sister. I'll give you a good example of that one. My younger sister worked in a factory there in Hopkinsville for several years, and she was doing fine. I mean, worked there for several years. One day, somebody figured out, oh, she's a Sutton. And they asked her, said, do you have anything to do with that thing there in Kelly? And she said, well, yeah, that was my dad, my grandmother, some aunts and uncles. Oh, well, they beat her down. They just laughed at her and just would not. And it just tore her all to pieces. And, doing that in this day and time, I can't imagine what, my family went through back then because, like I said, they were beaten down over this story. She was beaten down at work once they found out who she was. So, yeah, nobody else is going to come forward. You got to have thick skin for this. I don't care. you know, ask your questions. I'll do the best I can to answer them. People want to laugh, let them laugh. I don't care. I've had teenagers come up to me at functions. This is how close-minded people are. Teenagers, I'm talking 16, 17 years old, came up to my booth one day at a thing I was at and told me I did not believe in God because I believed in aliens. I'm like, no, that's not true. I believe in God, but that's how people think. That's
Well,
how,
I just applaud you for your courage and
well,
thank you
thank
so much for your
you.
story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Anybody here in Rapids? Question? Yes. Okay.
Has there been other sightings since that initial night of the incident
Well, let me tell
in
you,
the
if there
Kelly area?
were, nobody would say anything.
Oh, no.
Just like my Uncle JC said, if he ever seen them again, if they ever came back again, he wouldn't speak of it. You'd have to kill him to make him speak of it. People, they were afraid to say anything. People didn't come forward till after the fact and talk about what they had seen and heard because they were afraid to, because they seen how bad my family was getting whipped over this. So, it was a while before people came forward with all this stuff.
All right. Anybody online have any questions? Just make sure you type it in chat there. Has anybody in Fargo got anything else? Okay, well, we got one here, so hang on.
Nothing new online.
What I'd like to know is, did you have a chance to check this is going to sound really weird, to check their the blood on the people that you didn't know? Did you check the blood at all? Did anybody?
No, they didn't do anything. They didn't do any kind of research or taking samples of anything. The only thing that happened was that the family was interviewed. They were interviewed by all kinds of people. I mean, Bud Ledwith, who was with the WHOP radio station, came and did the best, I guess. He talked to them all day long. He took them off to a separate room, closed up, asked them to describe what they had seen. And they all did. And they all, if anybody knows about the three drawings, all very similar. Their stories never changed. To this day, if they were still alive, their stories wouldn't change. And,
So there's 3 different drawings of these.
yes, there
things?
are
Okay.
3 different drawings. I don't know if I've got one of my. I don't know if there's any in this book or not. Hold on, let me check. Yeah, there's 3 different drawings of the little guys.
Geraldine did donate a bunch of stuff for us for next month for Christmas and our 1-year anniversary. She's got 3 different books. No, 4 different books. 4 different books. Because one of them is a kid's book. It's awesome. And some little plushy goblin guys, which Geraldine, you're so awesome. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep. So make sure you come back for
let me
next
tell
month.
you. Let me tell you this much. I am working on a new book. It's actually going to be a whole lot better than these others. I'm actually, well, it's been a while since I did it. And when I first wrote these books, I really didn't get into it as much as I should have, because it was like, because when you do something like this, you really got to research it and get into it. And I was just doing it to get something out there because I was tired of hearing the story and it not being right. And but this next book is, and I plan on stopping these 2 and just using the 1. It's going to be a whole lot better. I've actually got an illustrator that's drawing pictures for me for it. It's really going to be cool. I'm really going to like this one. It's turning out really good. So, and another thing too, next year is the 70th anniversary. And so with the 70th anniversary, you've got to have a Goblin Con.
Oh, absolutely.
So Hopkinsville is going to have a Goblin Con next year. And hopefully if it does well, we plan on starting to have one every year. But yeah, next year is 70 years. So we're planning a big thing. We've already got several celebrities lined up, speakers, and it's going to be really good. It's going to be really good.
I assume probably around the August 21st time frame.
Well, no, we had to do that different. We had to, we're actually going to have it in October, believe it or not, because
Okay.
there's just so much. So Hopkinsville is a hopping little place. I didn't realize how much Hopkinsville did. They've got stuff going on constantly there. And so we had to pick October, but in August, we're going to have a kickoff event. And it's going to be really cool. It's just going to be a little like 1-day thing. And we're going to have a guy that actually did a really good documentary, Barry Conrad, years ago. And he's going to come in, he's going to show the documentary and speak. And we're going to have a dinner and, several other things going on to kick off for October. So anyway,
Great.
that's the plan.
Awesome. Okay. Fargo, do you guys got anything? I saw something
Yeah,
come up on chat. If you want to get
I
that
actually,
ball
yeah, I have a question. Geraldine, I understand you don't have a thin skin about, critics and
No,
questions
you can ask.
and this is
Yeah.
not meant to be insulting in any way, but I watched, History Channel sort of short, presentation about the Hopkinsville Goblins. And one common criticism that I've read about this stuff since I was 8 years old. I've been interested in UFOs, that's why I'm with MUFON. But I had a question. How does your family or yourself respond to the common sort of idea posed by critics that your family was seeing like great horned owls flying in and out of the trees? I always wondered about that.
Yes, I love that so much. Yes, the owls, the cats, the monkeys. Well,
I haven't heard about monkeys.
yes, there were monkeys, there were cats, there were
Yeah.
owls. Yeah, all those. There was even one story about it was a neighbor that they had killed, and that's why all the gunfire and all that stuff, and they were trying to hide it, and so they made up the whole goblin story. Yeah, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. But the owl, the monkey, and the cat theory, you got to be absolutely bonkers to think it was
Mhm.
any of those, because they had two shotguns and they had rifles. They were shooting and hitting these things.
Yeah, we have a comment from Hope online, and she says owls do not get shot and pop back up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There'd be splattered feathers and guts
Yeah,
everywhere and fur and
they would
whatever
stay
they
down,
were.
yeah. And
You know.
my understanding is that the great horned owls, even larger ones, about 2 feet tall, and I think these goblins were what, like 1.5 meters tall? That was the
Well, three and a
estimated?
half, about 3.5
Two
foot
and a
tall.
half meters. What a meter is?
It'd be about 1
3 feet,
meter.
right? 1 meter.
Yeah, a
Okay.
meter's about 40 inches. So
Okay, so still quite a bit larger than a great horned owl or an eagle owl. I read that. I'm not familiar with
Well,
the species.
yeah, I've
but-
read it was an eagle owl, and I did some research on the eagle owl, and it turns out eagle owls aren't even in Kentucky. So I don't
Yeah.
know where they got the eagle
I
owl.
thought they had a northern range, yeah, up by barred owls way up in Canada. So
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. But yeah, there are eagle owls. Aren't they Asian species? I'm not familiar. So
Oh, I'm not sure either.
Yeah.
I just read that they weren't even a species of Kentucky owl. That they couldn't have been an eagle owl in the first place.
and they don't have glowing yellow eyes. So.
Exactly.
One more question from Hope. She asked, has anyone tested the soil in the circle where nothing grows or tried to plant grass in there or anything, if you know?
No, nobody ever tested anything. Like I said, they just wanted to get rid of it. And as far as anything growing there, nothing grew there for years. Now back in 2020, I did a show called UFO Witness with Ben Hansen, and of course he came in and we did everything there. And the land that the circle is on, it is owned by one family. Actually, the whole property has been, sold out in pieces. There's one family that owns the tract of land that has the well where the house sat and where the landing was. They bought that tract of land. So when Ben came in to do the show, of course, the first thing he wanted to do was go back there because he thought he could figure out where the landing was. He had done some figuring, some research. He thought he could figure it out. He thought he could do it. And of course, the people that own that land don't let anybody on it. You can't get on there to save your soul. They just won't allow it. And so he went up to the house and asked them if we could. And they outright said no. He offered them money. No, nobody can. So what we did is their house is way up front and the landing is way in the back. Well, we lucked up because all this land back there is nothing but woods. You can't see their house. You can't see anything once you get past so far. So what we did is we snuck back in there. He kind of measured where he thought it could be, secretly, and went back in the woods. Of course, it's thick. It's thick back in there. And he took his Geiger counter. He took his metal detector. And he got back in there and kept going over spots. And he finally found a spot that was not as grown as the rest of the forest. It was sparser. And so he took his Geiger counter over it. And sure enough, it detected stuff. Now, the metal detector, you had to do that with a grain of salt because he was looking for bullets and metal. And, there's lots of people that have been back in there shooting and hunting. So you really couldn't use that because I'm sure a lot of those trees back there have bullets in them from where hunters have hunted since 55, before 55, because there's old trees back in there. And, but yeah, he thinks he probably found the spot. It's back there.
awesome. I saw another question come up on the chat. Paul,
Yeah.
can you grab that?
Sure. Yep. That The question is from Jamie. Jamie's asking, were there any specific group or groups of people identified who appeared to be leading the efforts or campaign against your family to make fun of them, etc.?
Oh, I'm sure there were lots of people that were doing that. I just can't imagine what the kids went through at school because you know how cruel kids are. My Uncle JC couldn't even hold down a job afterwards because every time people would find out who he was, they would just ridicule him so bad and make fun of him. He couldn't handle it, him being a war vet like he was and then having to deal with that. So he would work a job for a little bit, that would start up. He would have to quit. He'd find another job, stay there as long as he could handle it. He'd quit. He just couldn't do it. So it was bad for him. My grandmother shut down. She wouldn't talk to anybody until, Isabel Davis come forward and talked to her, and Isabel won her trust and was able to talk to her and get as much as she could out of her. But yeah, it was just really bad. And the kids today, they don't talk about it. My Uncle Lonnie, he's the oldest. He's 80 now, and he don't talk about it anymore. The other two have just put it out of their head. I think they just don't want to remember it. It's just too scary because these things were. My Aunt Mary, she was 7, and she's a tiny little thing today, tiny little thing. And I can't imagine how small she was back then. And these things were probably as big as she was. And they didn't know what they were. You can't, you have to think about this. These were children that were seeing some kind of little being as big as they were. They were seeing them getting shot. They were seeing that they weren't bleeding. They weren't dying. They weren't falling on the ground, and that's it. They were coming back at them. You got to think that is something horrifying to live with for the rest of your life.
No, it'd certainly be an ordeal. That would be frightening for sure. And I'm sorry to hear about the sort of the ridicule directed at your family. That's just so ignorant, I guess, is the word I would use for that. We do have a couple more questions from online. Fran asks have you heard if there have been any other sightings since that in the area? And I know you mentioned the ship that was hovering like shortly after that.
Mhm.
Anything years later since then in the
Well, there's been little stories. I've had people come forward and tell me things they have seen. Like there's a Mr. Smith that he's such a cool dude. He's an older guy. And him and his wife had an incident back in the 70s where they had come home from the movies and there was this craft hovering over their backyard.
Wow.
I've had other people come forward and tell me, like this one girl I knew, she was taking a college class in Hopkinsville, and we lived in Princeton at the time, which is about a 40-minute drive. And she says one night she was coming home from college, and of course it's dark, and these red lights were following her. She said they were not truck lights, they weren't car lights, they weren't any kind of vehicle lights like that. They were some kind of red light that was following her home, and then I think all of us have seen stuff. I've seen things I can't explain. But like I said before, a lot of people just put it off on the military, especially when you live
Sure.
close to a military base. That's how
Sure.
they get by with it,
And that
That was a good excuse.
yeah, that might segue into the next question from Jamie online. She is kind of curious about the source of ridicule, if it just came from all directions or if it seemed to be originating from someone, such as like the modern day whistleblowers described, like David Grush last year in the congressional hearing. Did they ever were they ever able to identify like a certain group, or was it like one or two people, or
Oh
just
no, it was
general?
everybody.
Okay,
It
so
was
just pretty much
everybody.
everyone. Okay.
Yeah, there were papers all the way. There were people interviewing them from all the way from California, and if you would read some of the articles, a lot of them are making fun of them. So it didn't matter. It was just everybody everywhere. The only people that didn't were a lot of the police officers felt really bad for them because of all the ridicule that was going on. And they believed them. They seen them. They were there, and they could tell something happened. And another fact too that I have forgot to mention: my grandmother, like I said, was really religious. She wouldn't lie if her life depended on it. So a lot of people believed it because of her. And that was like my two older uncles, Tillman and Frank, that lived in Hopkinsville. See, they even made fun of it. Their own flesh and blood was making fun of it until they heard that their mama said it happened and it was real. And then they said, oh no, if mama said it happened, it's real. Totally changed their tune. But they didn't believe my dad and JC. But when my grandmother said it, they totally changed their tune about it. So even family was making fun of them until mama said it was so. But yeah, I mean, just everybody everywhere was.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Anybody else? No more questions. Boy, I could sit here and talk all night. Geraldine, that's just amazing. What do you got, Paul?
Nothing more from Fargo.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, thank you very much, Geraldine.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
That is really good. Really? You're still here? The meeting's over. You can go home. Just go home. Seriously? He grabbed the top of his head? Oh, I can't wait to read the next book. Wow.